Everybody, this is a board meeting in public board meeting. I think we have no guests at the moment, so I'm going to take it as read that there's nobody recording other than the official recordings that we've got running there, which gets posted on the website. Apologies. Yeah. Kate Page only. Fine. David, you'll be here for the rest of the whole public meeting. Okay.
Good idea. Could I remind everyone to use their microphones because we're recording? They won't hear me because my voice is weird. But also, there's a fire alarm test at 11.
Oh.
It wasn't last time we were here. So just so that Paul can note that, we're sticking to our health and safety responsibilities.
Yeah, and the emergency exits are as indicated.
Follow the rod, basically.
Does it mean we're the opposite?
No.
No, it's just a test.
Okay, fine. So, any interest to declare? No interest to declare. Okay, just a reminder for anybody that's actually viewing this on the website that all of our managing conflicts of interest and links to the register of interest are on our website. So I then go to the minutes of the last meeting that was held on the 26th of September. So that was also held here. So first of all, for accuracy, pages 1 and 2. Thank you, Rod. Pages 3 and 4. 5 and 6. 7 and a bit of 8. Okay.
Christmas Eve.
Okay. Right. Any points of inaccuracy? Do I have a move to approve?
Yep.
Okay, on to the action log, which, as you can see, it's got a few open ones still there. So the first one, which is B126.518, that's the one in terms of public health. So once again, I think that's been moved now to January. Is that right, Richard? Okay. The next open one is the BAF. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to say.
Yeah, we can close that. Actually, that risk has not been deleted, but it's been repositioned as a transformation risk. So we can close that, I think.
Okay. Then the final three, which are the last three on the sheet, the BCF plan. David, anything to say there?
Yep, so Ed and I and team have sat down to look at it. It's not as simple as task as making it as easy read as possible, but so what we'll be doing, bring that back to you in January.
Okay, lovely. And then the other two are the staff survey action plan, which Juliet and the directors are still open.
Well, it's due in December, and the reason being is because it's got to go to SIG first. They have completed that, but we can update. There's a lot of progress being made, and a lot of actions being taken that we know the SIG supported. And I know members of the board have also been involved in. So Alison, for example, we're focusing on the areas of improvement here now rather than the areas of strengths. And actually, so Alison, for example, has been, sorry, I should have done that. I've been doing a number of OD type sessions. Yes. With a number of key teams where actually we're aware of particular issues. I have to say also that, give credit to Elka. I think we've seen a demonstrable impact in one of the teams that Elka's taken over, only in a very short period of time as well. So I think there's quite a concerted effort in a number of areas and a number of another one that you're taking, yeah. So we will have a detailed action plan that we will bring back to the board. And obviously at the moment, we've got to remember that this data is over 18 months old because actually we then, the process of finishing off, I think it's today, is that right? Tomorrow. The staff survey that went out for this year. So, and we are already at a 83 or 4% compliance, which is better than last year as well. So in reality, we're pushing quite hard. Nationally, the top one is only 90%, so we're not that far off. And average CCGs are around 70%. So I think we'll do, obviously I won't be here when we do that, but we'll do a comprehensive review when it's gone through all those processes in January.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yes, thank you very much. Okay. Okay. Item 5, which is questions received prior to the meeting from members of the public. Rod.
We had one question that actually only came in yesterday, so that's not within our 48-hour stipulation. So we've said that we'll respond to that in writing shortly.
Okay, lovely. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I go straight on now to our Chief Exec's report. Okay, Catherine.
Okay, so, right, this, hopefully everybody's had a chance to read it. It's my final report. So, and hopefully you've picked up that, and I just wanted to take a moment just to personally express my thanks to the board and the public about the support that I've had personally, but also the support that everybody's given to the organisation and the staff that sits within it. I don't think we could have made anywhere near the transformation and changes that we've made and the benefits to patients without everybody pulling their weight and a phenomenal amount of hard work and everybody playing their role. So, and I know how much everybody has just put in so much commitment to make the delivery of this organisation and then wider the services that we offer in the Commission. So there's obviously going to be a large agenda ahead, and this is a real turning point, obviously also for the CCGs as well, and also our development of our ICP. But, I think we're in a really strong place. We should be really proud of what we've achieved, and actually I think I would suggest that we're in a great place to drive forward the next stage of that transformation and change. And it might be difficult at times, and actually change is always difficult, but we will manage it, being at the forefront and leading that change. So, and I'm very confident that everybody that's remaining and the strong executive team will continue to make that difference. So thank you from me. Before I go into some of I'll go into some of the detail then around some of the areas I've been working on. It's obviously possible for us when we do these reports to write down absolutely everything that we do since the last meeting, because there's just such a phenomenal amount. I started off by making reference to the work around the ICP. I think, Nick is, firstly, from as far as my personal objectives were, is that we decided collectively, sort of even 12 months ago, and actually jointly with Phil Christie, when Christine arrived, that we would absolutely move on with our ICP development. And I think we have collectively made tremendous progress, and actually I know across the STP now recognised, I think Ian as well, of the progress that we have made in this part of the world. And actually again puts us at the forefront of driving change and ahead of the curve, I would suggest. So we are very committed to the development of that. We have done through a number of, it started off with actually quite chairs and chief officers and directors of strategy and so forth. But it feels now it's become much wider, and I would suggest that because of the number of board-to-boards that we've had with Watford. We had one last week, and for those people who were there, if we roll back 12 months, probably 18 months, when you did that original session with
it was 18 months at the end.
where we went back to basics around speed dating, actually, it's just a wholly different agenda, isn't it? And it feels like actually, certainly at our board and also at their board, there's much more of an alignment around the next stage. And ultimately our job now is to go a level below, actually, consistently across organisations and also consistently across all of our providers. But even then we had a session, David, last week, didn't we, with the wider team, with the LCH, HCT, HPFT, HCC, and anybody else? No, that's right. Yeah, and actually really good engagement. We had some NEDs there as well from some of the other providers. If the chair couldn't come, they found it extremely valuable. And actually, some of the feedback was that they would also like to be invited to some of those sessions. So we need to make them manageable, but actually at the same time, I think we're going to widen it. And I know Thelma's doing some work well across the STP then also around how we get NEDs and lay members and their role and that first, particularly around the governance agenda, but also more broadly, there seems to be a real appetite, I would suggest, at NED and lay member level to play their part in driving and leading this change as well. So personally, I welcome that, and I think it will be a significant support mechanism, not only to manage the change safely, but also to value their opinion in what we need to do. So it feels, I would suggest, that we've delivered on that, and actually on the initial stages, there's a long way to go, clearly. but I would like to bring credit to everybody who's been involved in it. And I think, as I'll come on to a little bit later, that we've not just talked also about the narrative and the vision and the principles and the values and all that sort of stuff, but actually doing the doing, and David's bit around the local delivery plan. And actually that's probably been going slightly longer anyway. And they are true system-wide plans. So I think we should use those mechanisms that we've now got in place to drive the next stage of the journey. So EU exit, just updating the board because obviously everybody's been involved in the assurance about EU exit. We have actually been assured, we've gone through an assurance process since then, and since we've last met, and we are green, as in we've done as much as we can at this stage with what we know. It's not that we don't continue to do it, and I know Amanda's still doing a lot of work around that space, particularly around care homes and obviously jointly with HCC around residential homes and care home providers, being obviously one of the biggest risks around workforce, and then secondly medicines management. So actually from a meds management perspective, our budget is actually holding still. We did a review earlier on this week, and actually prescribing is still what I'll come on to later. So we're still in the same position, but actually we have been assured as green. Then governance, we don't often talk about audit reports here, but Paul's going to do a report later on audit during the day. But actually we have started to have quite a number of audit reports. We've been doing a lot of work around governance over the last few years, clearly, but we've had several now that have been green, which in fact we always used to challenge the auditors, what does it take to get a green? And they were never quite able to describe that, but actually we've achieved it. So, and several cases actually, haven't we? So I know they will go to audit committee, but ultimately it really represents the excellent strength in the assurance processes that we have. In fact, there was one report that actually had no actions on it at all, which was phenomenal.
Never seen that before.
Never seen that before. So we were very pleased with that. Right, so operationally, we have been doing a lot around prevention. Obviously, Richard and Amanda, Tim, David's team, and jointly with Public Health. There is now a plan that went to ComExec, which we've agreed, and we obviously, since we've last met, agreed the first stage of that, which is the Henry project, which went to Commission Exec, and we agreed to jointly commission with Public Health. We've also started the social prescribing grants through the PCNs. So those have gone out. We're expecting, we know that there's good voluntary sector appetite. So looking forward to seeing what those deliver. I think there's a time frame coming up in the next few weeks, isn't there, around assurance of the sign-off. Yeah, so there's a process in place. So, and Tim is leading that. So then we talk a lot about primary care, and I think people often underestimate how much transformation and support is going on in that space, obviously with Elizabeth, Daniel and Lynn. We also last week we had another CDs meeting, clinical directors meeting, and I think there was a good atmosphere in there around the change, the direction of travel. The team have done a lot to present some support plans. The general feedback is good. NHS England's feedback is that we're assured that we're delivering on what we need to deliver, but there's a long way to go. And you'll see in the report we talk about some of their own personal training and development plans, i.e. GP clinical leadership and educational events, but also then a lot of things that we're also starting to commission with the PCNs, and then also support packages that go alongside them around their development. There's a lot of work going up to taking that to Primary Care Committee in December in order to enact some of that, but certainly the support packages anyway. But there's a lot of engagement with the CDs in order to be able to make that happen, and I know people are involved in that round the ring. Clearly, as I've referred to, there's the LDP plans and the legal architecture agreement, which David's been working on getting those going. And next month, I'm going to do EERM meetings with all the providers. So we've invited them along, the team are just preparing agendas, so a joint meeting around enhanced ERM, which will be new and clearly won't be the finished product at the first meeting, but actually is a sign of the change around delivery. I can't obviously spend hours talking about what's happening in primary care, but broadly that was a stop door. Then CYPCC, so the board will be aware obviously of our links and our back discussions around CYPCC. I think broadly we have made enormous progress as an organisation. We've transitioned a lot of the commissioning infrastructure over to the CCG. Actually that's gone relatively smoothly, and actually we're really starting to what I call focus on filling the gaps with provision, stable provision, and how we build more resilience into the marketplace. That's our next biggest agenda, and the wider workforce issues that go with it. There is still a lot to do in what is effectively a very small cohort of children, and we obviously struggle with pressures around workforce, as you would expect, particularly in this space. But we continue to spend a lot of time collectively, operationally in CYPCC. CAMS, similarly, same type of focus. I actually chair the CAMS board, which people know anyway. David's going to take that over from January, and Marion, who's Jenny's deputy, will co-chair with David also from January. So there will be continuity. Board will be familiar that we've completed a demand and capacity review. It isn't quite finished at the moment. There's a bit more work to be done on it before the end of December, and then to go back to CAMS board. But that will give us a better view then around what does exist at the moment, what capacity, what the growth and demand could look like, and how we address that over the longer term on a proactive way. So all partners are aligned to that. It is a joint system-wide piece of it across Hertfordshire, and it's quite essential in order to be able to manage what we know is increasing pressure. I have to say the initial review of demand shows that most of the referrals are coming from GPs, and we are going to be doing some training and some sharing the data around that, around variance in referral patterns in January with the localities. So that's going to come out, and Deborah Shepherd, who's the CAMS lead, is going to be spending some time with each of the locality chairs to discuss that. So, and actually in December we'll also be putting, following a review of some pilot schemes that are in place, what do we do around primary care support, similar to what we've done in adults around children. So that's also coming. So all of this tries to fit together around those pathway developments. So you're going to see more of that in the next couple of months. Then we've done less really this time on plan care, as you would expect, but we've made reference in the report to some of the work around pathology and diabetes, which is, again has gone to ComExec. But I also did want to pick up around CLCH, which clearly feels like we very much stopped talking about mobilisation, which was only 8 weeks ago. But actually I know they are very focused now on transformation. They're already that work stream set up. There's a lot happening in January and onwards in that space, particularly around rapid response and frailty and everything that goes with that, and the local delivery plans. There are some issues around services that we know that need stabilising that have come out, but I think even in the last, we are now starting to see even in the last few weeks the impact of our detox, for example. It's making a significant difference, and even at this point in the winter we do have capacity, which is quite unusual. So I don't know whether you've seen the same thing, Ian, actually at your end, but it does seem much cleaner.
It does. I was going to say in the month of October, we usually discharge about 800 people a month from Hertfordshire hospitals. In October it was 1,100, so a huge increase. But waiting lists and delays are exactly the same as they were in September. So we've got some inbuilt resilience there that we haven't had before.
So I don't want to call it too soon, but we can definitely see some more sustainability there, which is good. So, and the only final thing then is the HR section, which is in here. So everybody, as you do your half-year appraisals, will be online this year. So linked into your ESR. So we are.
Oh, can't wait.
Absolutely, it's very important that we do that. That's key. We are, we have moved paperless, as you can see, as part of moving the office. So we do need everybody's support in making sure that that happens. And then there's a lot of work continues then around the leadership development programs, which are in here. Happy to take on questions.
Questions? Yes. Start with Trevor and then Rami.
So just to really reinforce on the primary care side that obviously coming up with winter, general practices, as everyone knows, is under pressure. So I think particularly to welcome the support in terms of this PCN development, which is a whole new area that we're having to look at. So welcome the support, and certainly talking to our GPs this week in decorum. They welcome that, and we hope that those measures that we'll see at PCCC will be agreed, and so they're looking forward to moving that agenda forward, maybe with some project support, as well as some of the things that have been mentioned.
Rami?
Doesn't come out. Two operational things. As far as the drug shortages, are we able to get a little bit more collaboration between the pharmacies and general practice, so we have some knowledge where supplies are, so we're not doing it on a practice by practice basis and a drug by drug basis? That's the first one. And the second thing, the really positive thing, when we're talking about CAMS, we've had at other committees quite a bit of a shift towards investing more into the areas in parity of esteem. That means a little bit more publicity to our practices, because that is an area that keeps coming up, and that would be quite useful. We're doing quite a lot of work. And the third thing that I just want to say is, first, the CCG has been transformed.
Okay, Lynn, do you want to answer the mental management bit, and I'll do the mental health?
Hi, Amy. I'll pick that request up with Sarah Crotty, Heads and Meds Management, but she does do regular communications, but I will just check on that point. Okay, come back to you.
And on mental health, so actually David and I have been doing monthly meetings now with Anna Benson and Mark Allen, and the commissioning team around parachute team and mental health, because there has been a lot of focus and a lot of investment actually. And we even concluded at the last one, which was last week, that I think we're into much more of a rhythm and a rigour around it, and we're starting now to focus on what next year's investments will be. So what we've asked the team is to come and do a presentation at GP Forum. Actually, they're on the agenda for that, they're not they? For the 11th? Yeah? Yeah. And then I think after that we'll perhaps find some way of picking up with Juliet then around how that's a public-facing document, as well as once we've done the membership conversation. So they were going to come and talk about what they had done, what their ideas were, and then also on the back of what I referred to earlier, the papers that are going to come exec in December. Yeah? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Paul. Do you want to come back?
So first I just want to say how sad it is that it is actually Catherine's last report, and also that it's taken this long to get a mention for all the stuff in it. But actually, on a more serious note, I think it's actually really important that the sort of the improved performance on internal audits. When you look at sort of transforming an organisation, one of the things you need to be sure of is that you're actually got a steady base that you're transforming on. Otherwise, if people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, you can't transform it because you don't know what's going on. So I think it's really important that we continue that sort of progress and that focus on the day job and the business as usual. So I mean, I'll talk more about it when we get to my report, but I think there's a good linkage between the way that transformation can be successful once you've actually got the sort of the basic foundations working properly.
Trevor, did you want to come back? Sorry,
No, it's just really to add to the mental health thing, that certainly, again, we've had locally the trust coming to our locality, and while things aren't perfect, remember there are plans in place, and we hope to see the improvements in the services coming along.
yes.
First one. Sorry. Could I just say how pleased I was to see here about the social prescribing and about how that is actually rolling out in practice now, having heard it talked about. And that I always sort of speak up for sort of communications and trying to make sure that the public know about this good news, that they understand what that really means, so that the people who do need to access these services do so, And I know it's always a challenge, but that it would be good to see that message in due course as the services roll out, and also that the dialogue's maintained with the voluntary sector so that they are ready when the demand increases, as we hope it will for their services, that they're ready to provide for that.
Yeah, that's it.
I'm glad to see the winter pressure in the report here because it's well received by GPs, by patients, and an indication of how well it's received by every member of general practices. My reception staff keep asking me from August saying, will we have the winter pressure this year? Because they are at the front face of general practice, and every year they look forward to it. Thank you.
I think we purposely gave it out earlier this year as well, didn't we? And the other thing is yesterday we also offered out more to do double ups during the 3 Christmas weeks, and all the federations came back with a response.
So we've doubled the capacity and extended access evenings and weekends over the 3 Christmas weeks. But you're right, it's year 5 of the winter pressures at practice level, and it's probably the most well received service that we actually offer, I would say.
And on the medication shortage front, there is a good website that maybe we need to encourage GPs to use in the locality and also in CCG. You can just type the medicine name and we'll tell you whether it's going to be available or not. So I'm going to speak to Sarah Crotty to encourage use of it more.
Yeah, I will do that because she does do a weekly news letter out to practices, so I'll make sure that it's in the letter again, reiterating that. Thank you.
Thelma?
All right. All right. No, all right.
Oh, sorry, I'm left over. That's my excuse.
Veer away from far right.
How do we measure, my organisation, there's always talk about winter pressure and supports to GPs. I was just wondering, how do we measure the benefits on the other side? So we gradually increase support to GPs to be able to provide the service, but how do we measure that, the effect we want? In other words, the people who want appointments get very quickly, you get more, I was just wondering really.
So they're going to talk about the primary care measures.
Yeah. Because it's we say it benefits GPs, staff, and the public. So how do we measure on the public side?
No, it's a good question. So we do monitor the capacity in general practice, but then we also look at the A&E activity, and we monitor that through our monthly ERM meetings. Plus we all have the system resilience meeting that we have with West Herts Trust, and they actually also say we see the benefit over October to March when that additional capacity is put in. So they really welcome it. And actually last year we had some additional resource left, and we'd seen the activity slightly increase in line with national picture after we finished that programme. So we extended it, and we extended it around the bank holidays. And again, we see there's a significant improvement when we do that.
Thank you. I'd say that the qualitative and the quantitative information is equally important. So what you can get a feel with daily information. What Ian talked about is a number of what we're seeing go through, what arrives at the front door, the type of patients that arrive at the front door, why, what the pressures and stresses. We daily we get feeds of information that build up a picture, and ultimately the answer is not actually one single thing. It's a complex factor of lots of different things, and you have to try and put in interventions as you go along, depending on what's happening. So it's always difficult to measure the outputs of it actually, but ultimately we know there is an increased need for access, and actually as the whole of the NHS system does around whether it's acute providers, social care, whether it's mental health, everybody has to try and put in extra capacity to be able to manage that demand. Ultimately the way that we plan our finances is that more of our activity happens in the second half of the year than the first. So it's all linked to the same position, I think.
Stuart. I'm really pleased to see the investment we're making in leadership development particularly, and I see we've got our own programme coming in as from January 2020. How far does, when you talk about the senior leadership team, which is great, how far does the leadership development go down the hierarchy of the organisation? In other words, bringing other leaders through in the future.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can add on to that, the time management bit, can't you? So funny enough, we did actually Alice Music study. So I think we spent, Heinz not here today, obviously, he's had an operation. But so as an organisation, we spent a lot of time on leadership development. We've done, obviously we had 100% compliance with appraisals, and in that, everybody's got their own PDPs, and therefore we've done a lot of management training that goes along with that, learning about how people are supporting individuals. So that's what I call the bedrock of the day-to-day that we should be expecting. And then we've also commissioned a lot of specific courses for individuals, and that varies whatever level they are, and also what their specific needs are on the back of that. There's more that we can do, and will always be more that we can do, because it never stops actually. And we recently did a self-assessment. We were volunteered to do it, we didn't have to do it around talent management. And actually, because we were seen as a bit of an exemplar in doing it, and actually even then, you recognise how much we've still got to do. It was more of a diagnostic, wasn't it, to help us with the next stage. So, for example, is how far do we discuss particular talent management strategies here? Well, not as a talent management strategy. We've discussed it, and we do discuss OD here, but actually in reality, it's probably not as linked all the way through as it needs to be. So. But that was seen as a more of a, you're an expert in that field, and there was lots of things to help us guide us in the next stage of the journey as a result of the self-assessment. And then I'm just trying to think, about 9 months ago we set up the talent management group, or is it longer than that? 12 months?
2 years.
Is it that long? Yeah. So do you want to?
I chair the talent management group, and actually we're bringing a paper to the quality committee next week, which will outline the sort of key headlines of the work we've been doing, partly in response to we've recognised that there's not enough visibility across the CCG, particularly at board level, as to what we're actually doing. So I think let's pick up the detail there, but actually some of the pieces of work that we've been doing with each of the directorates is looking at critical posts and succession planning. And we've obviously started that at the top. It's a moving feast because people move around, but actually what we've agreed now is that we'll roll that down through the organisation so that we can identify where we know there's gaps in our succession planning and what those personal development plans need to look like. The ESR being, the appraisal being on ESR and being electronic is absolutely key to this, because what it does is automatically populate a training needs analysis for us, which means we can set up what the needs are of the organisation according to PDP. So lots of work. I think it's fair to say that it's been quite top heavy initially in terms of senior leadership team, but we're rolling downwards across the organisation, and Delphine in the OD team has done a lot of work on training opportunities for more junior staff. It's just not quite so structured, I would say.
Alison.
And just to add to what Diane has said, a lot of what we're now looking at, having looked at the succession planning in some detail, is looking at the exercise of leadership skills, which can be exercised throughout the organisation and can help prepare people for development into more formal leadership roles. But I think we all agree that it is the case that leadership skills can be developed and exercised wherever you are, depending on the situations that you face. And that's why the training is now focused more on that kind of thing as well. So.
Thelma.
Yes.
Learning by experience.
I have been doing some research on the roles that lay members and other NEDs can play in the integrated care system. And the CCG lay members network developed something some time ago. So I think once we're clear about the possible roles that we can play, I think it would be helpful to look at what kind of support in terms of development we may need to help us to better engage and make a valuable contribution.
Thank you. I'd just like to say something. As it's Catherine's last board meeting in public, and I think it's important to actually state this in public. But rarely do you find somebody who has such passion and drive I think the leadership that we have had as an organisation, but also as a system, has been exemplary over the last 3 years. There has been absolute financial rigour, absolute emphasis on transparency, and a strong sense of patient focus. And I would say as highlights over the last 3 years has been the community transformation. I think that, Catherine, you leave a legacy which is our duty to fulfil in terms of the frailty and the work that is there for the STP. I also think that you also will leave us with a fantastic foundation for our ICP development and also the work on CAMS. So I think that has been absolutely exemplary. I think that one of the other parts is that you've always held both this organisation and all organisations, as well as the system, to account. And I think that has been, you know, a very, very strong mark of your leadership. You're never complacent, and I think there's one word which perhaps some people would not maybe immediately have thought, but I think it's a really important thing to say, and that is that you have compassion. And that is both on an individual level and also for patients. And I think that is something that isn't always recognised, and I wanted to make sure that it was stated in public. Okay, thank you. You don't have to respond. Okay, so now moving on to the back. Right. Okay, this is for the discussion and approval.
It's a short report. This month, as you can see, Exec have reviewed all of the risks, and essentially there are 2 changes. Excuse me. One around the financial balance risk 4.3, which we're proposing to reduce that score from 12 to 8. In view of the fact that at the end of September we still have a surplus, and we're forecasting to achieve our financial plan by the year end. And the other one I alluded to earlier on was risk 3.4, and Catherine mentioned that we've moved in ACS from very much from mobilisation to pushing ahead with transformation. So that risk has really been repositioned as a transformation risk. And that's really all I wanted to say, but happy to take any questions, as I'm sure Exec colleagues are.
Okay. Yep, Paul?
So just an observation, I think. During next year, I think it would be really good to get a sight of sort of the wider health system view on risk, to see how we can, to make sure that our view on sort of what risks are out there is also consistent with what providers and other sort of colleagues are identifying, because we may own a piece of their risk that we need to be doing, which we haven't captured. I suspect we probably have got most of it here in one way or another, but it may add some other perspective to it. So I think it would be a useful exercise to try to do that.
Any other comments? Stun them into silence, right? Okay. And I think this is just a reminder that this is something that we obviously come to every board meeting in public. It's constantly there, and I think all committees, exactly, every committee highlights areas where we might need to address the risk and reassess. So this has been a massive change in the organisation over the last 3 years. I think, Thelma.
I'm sorry, I just thought of something. As we move towards integration, you've got the ICS, which is the strategic, and then you've got the ICP and us. I think we would need to think about how the ICS looks at and manages risk and how it impacts on us and our risk. It's probably similar to what you said.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Phil. We need to be very mindful of that going into the early part of next year in particular.
Maybe I'm just thinking as a topic we haven't spent, Thelma and I haven't spent time on it yet, but is actually that might be one of the topics that we do in the main members and then discussion. Yeah.
Okay, any other points? So are we asking for the board's approval of the back as it's stated here? Yep, not all round, thank you very much. So now on to the performance report, and I know that Diane will introduce this properly, but I think it is worth mentioning that we are constantly looking for the assurance in our performance in all levels of committees. I'll let Diane introduce it.
Okay, thank you. So this is the performance report that went to the Performance Committee this month, where are we? This month, right at the beginning of this month. So what you're looking at is July data, which I can imagine feels quite old, but it's important that we always look at validated data, and that's why you're looking at July. We've actually just completed the performance report ready for the Performance Committee next month, which will start to show the committee the August data. But I just wanted to, I'll assume that everybody has read the paper. I just wanted to highlight just a couple of areas, particularly in relation to the constitutional targets. So in terms of ED performance, the 4-hour target, actually we're continuing to see a steady, small but steady increase in the performance at Watford Hospital in A&E. I think again it's a multifactorial issue that's being impacted by a number of areas, but actually showing quite a sustained grip on that improvement at West Herts at the moment, and actually is seen as going from quite low down in the sort of regional and national tables to actually in a much better position. So still not at the 95%, but actually quite a positive move. In terms of RTT, again, we continue to see a small but steady improvement in that, and the 52-week breaches remain very low and sort of in the 1s and 2s, and are all related to patient choice. We've got a lot more visibility of those as well. In terms of the cancer, we also saw a slight improvement from the report you're looking at now, but we do still have some areas of non-compliance within the cancer. So in terms of those three areas, we have been working with West Herts on improvement plans for all of those. And actually, in line with how we're working now across provider and commissioning organisations, we're working much more closely between our performance lead and West Herts performance lead on working on those plans. So I think all of those plans have been seen at the performance committee. So we have a very intense scrutiny of progress with those. I just wanted to mention in terms of adding to the CLCH conversation, so obviously we've been in a mobilisation phase, but we are now, as well as the transformation, moving into a business as usual in terms of oversight of performance and quality, and we're starting with our first contract and quality review meeting tomorrow, which will start to see us have a really much clearer oversight of performance. I think it'll take a while for us to see the full data that we want to see, but it will be a good start, I think, tomorrow. As Gavin said, positive shoots at the moment. I won't go into any more detail unless anybody have any specific questions.
Okay. Yeah, Karina.
Can I, in this report, I found a mention of the clinical pathway for ambulatory care, and the development of some workshops during October and November. Can you tell me a bit more about it? Who's invited to the workshops, or is there any clinical input there?
Richard, I'm assuming you're involved.
Do you know anything about it?
I haven't got dates myself for the workshops at the moment.
What are
When we discussed it at the urgent care working group yesterday, I think what we're undertaking is a more detailed review of the patients who did not end up going to ambulatory care who potentially could have done. And that's a review that's going to take place with primary care input and the ambulatory care unit team as well, which I think is part of looking at the capacity for the service. One of the things that's been noted recently is that because of the increased, because of the pilot in ED with the TAPE pilot with more senior clinicians reviewing people more regularly and rapidly, that the use of ambulatory care has gone up, as you would expect. So we'll be looking at those to make sure that all of those cases are ambulatory care appropriate. And one of the interesting things is that because of the urgent treatment centre coming online in April, and mobilisation for that seems to be going well, we have to balance on the one hand investing more in ambulatory care and supporting the TAKE pilot, and on the other hand recognising that quite a lot of this work will be done by having an urgent treatment centre in place come April. So there's all of these things are potentially good bits of work. We just need to make sure that we don't end up sort of overlapping or paying for more than one thing. So that's my understanding of what the ambulatory care workshop's about, but I'm not really involved in those at the moment.
Okay, so it's not some formal.
No, so I think it's internal, and it's more about their experience and knowledge and training, isn't it, with their staff around the use of pathways and maximising opportunities, is my understanding.
I'll take it away there and check that there's, I mean, there'll be clinical involvement from West Herts, but I think that's worth
I
us.
just need to know what they are.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
Yep, Daniel.
Well, I think also for that there need to be some assurance that it would properly link in with the community pathways and the rapid response and the discharge teams. And so we want, if it is internal, some assurance that it is, that they're really aware of what's going to be going on in the community and how things link together.
Okay. Yep, David?
I'm just wondering if we should bring something back to tie all that together, just to give some assurance to the board at some point, or within the right committee within CCG, because all of those conversations are taking place between planned care and the urgent care teams, linking in with what Richard said. So there's nothing there that's not part of our business.
Well, this feels like it's a local, I think it's one specific thing, but it's actually really about the local delivery plans, of which ERM is part of it. So in reality, Daniel, your point will be that's where I'd expect that linkage to pick up. So I think we would expect it to go to the local delivery board to make sure that everybody is linked in with the community rapid response and every other pathway that's available. And similarly with acute frailty units as they come on board. So and maximising that's my expectation of what EERM is going to do. Yeah.
I think it was Stuart next, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, not Stuart. Your pen was.
Oh, sorry.
Then Elizabeth. Yeah.
So I just wanted to I think the board can take further assurance. I mean, Dan gave us a whistle-stop tour through that. I mean, one of the things that's really good about the performance committee and the report that comes to it now is that as new services are coming on, they're getting picked up and added in there. So you can see that the local developed standards are actually tracking sort of all the new contracts that are coming through and going through them in good detail, I have to say, page by page as we go through the meeting. So it gets a really thorough going over. And I think the board should be able to take good assurance that the committee is going through them in some detail.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Thank you. I just had a comment about Connect and the assurance. I just had a comment about Connect and the assurance comments. So the target for the patients we referred for the same condition within 6 months. I mean, the performance is about 1 in 4, as bad as 1 in 3, and I just wondered if we had a bit of narrative around that and actions to improve that. I know there's no target, but if 1 in 4 are going back for the same condition in 6 months, so there's something about that we just need to have a look at.
Yes, actually, our AVNI did give me, they obviously been doing a lot of work with the performance committee we've been talking about, which is what Paul referred to. This data, obviously, as we know, is older data, and as the performance committee have already received an improvement plan around Connect. AVNI, they had a meeting yesterday after so she did provide me with an update, and actually there's been a whole suite of changes around the LQRs, some of which are in here, and that one, if you remember we discussed before, was actually had to be reset because the target wasn't right in the first place. They have actually now, my understanding is, from the update yesterday, recruited all of the staff that were in line with the gaps that were in place and the extra staff, for the extra staff that they needed. They are well on the way of completing all the backlog that was in place, that was there, and they've actually kept on all the locums to complete all of that, whilst also keeping on recruiting permanent staff as well. So from AVNI's perspective, yesterday she said that they made significant progress during these last couple of months. We will see the uptake of the narrative in the August data into September and October. and that they'd closed down a great number of the actions that were outstanding on the improvement plan yesterday. So once she's compressed that, it was only yesterday's meeting, obviously, she'll present that to the Performance Committee for assurance and bring with that, I suppose, as part of the normal reporting.
Well, just to say that Connect is the subject of the deep dive next week between Performance and Quality Committee, so we'll take that and during that deep dive.
Okay, Alison, then Richard.
Can I just request really that we make sure that that uptick in performance, the uptick in the narrative that's described, is actually publicised as much as possible, because the uptick in patient conversation and the talk between patients about the service falls some way behind. So they're still talking, as I'm sure Jill would confirm, about what the system was like at first, and they will still talk about that even as improvements emerge, and that kind of it makes the improvements harder to actually implement because people are still have poor expectation. So if we could possibly make sure that we try and get a positive story about those improvements into the public domain in some way or other.
Okay, yep, Richard.
So I've been present at a number of meetings where we've talked with Connect, and I think we should just think about the fact that there could be a number of reasons why dissatisfaction is expressed with a new service. It could be that a new service isn't at capacity or doesn't have the right pathways. It could be that patients, for example, aren't happy with being given more advice about self-management of long-term conditions rather than cure. That will never be popular, but I fully support those messages. And it could also be that other providers who traditionally had more business as a result of musculoskeletal complaints aren't entirely happy because they have less work to do. So I think we need to just take all of that into account. One particular topic where I think things have worked well in terms of feedback was the issue of Cauda-Equina syndrome, and the issue that the musculoskeletal service was responding to routine referrals from GPs by advising them that their patients needed to attend A&E as an emergency for an MRI of their spine, which was partly because of national guidance on the subject. There have been some good conversations about that, and the ED consultants and the orthopaedic consultants do report that as a result of Connect listening to that feedback, that there have been far fewer referrals into ED as a result. So I'm sure it's not perfect, but I think they are listening.
Okay, thank you. Velma?
I mean, it's just one example, but just a balance here. I was referred to them earlier this year, and within a week I got a phone call. They left a message on a Saturday saying MSK. Now, because I was deeply suspicious, since I get all these calls from insurance, I went and Googled what MSK stood for, and it was some kind of ground mechanical. So they called me again on the same Saturday. I left a message, and I didn't call back. And then Sunday they called me, and I thought this must be serious. So on Monday I called them and found out that it was to do with my knee and that sort of, So no hospital, and I've dealt with hospitals or GPs have ever called me on a Saturday or a Sunday to make an appointment, So I was impressed. So it's just one example, but just a little bit of balance.
Okay. Yeah, Trevor.
I think, again, sometimes there are these simple things, and communication obviously is one that they're trying very hard, but sometimes the phraseology is sometimes misunderstood. And equally with that issue of people, returning, it's because they have an open door policy for 6 months, and therefore, if a problem isn't completely resolved, people are open to go back, which in the past you'd have had to re-refer them. So I think sometimes you're talking about the same thing in a different way, and we just need to fathom that out.
So was it David and then Karina? No, yeah, Karina.
I just recall that we've discussed at some point an issue with the MSK services referring too much into the spine group and spine. Yeah?
Yes.
Have we looked into that?
Yeah, so actually, it wasn't too much, it was more than we had in the plan. And actually, we've done a deep dive on it, and it's the level of referrals that are coming out of the MSK is in line with the plan. Without coming out of Connect is in line with the plan. So it is in line with the plan. But more people are choosing to go to BMI and Spine.
Handling, yeah.
And we've done that triangulation.
Yeah.
So it is is absolutely clear. I checked it and it is,
Yeah.
and it
We
several
know,
times.
we were sure that
We are.
Okay.
Thank you. Was it Azif next then, Stuart?
With communication is an issue, and they've acknowledged that in the meetings.
Yeah.
2 days ago, they confirmed that they have contract to upgrade their phone system within the next 6 weeks to have sort of waiting system to tell the patients where they are going to be in the lesson and how long it will take for them to speak to somebody, which is an improvement.
That's very helpful. Very helpful. Sorry, did you want to come?
And just very quickly on that, I mean, I use the quality alert system regarding an older patient who had tried to phone when it hadn't worked and asked for a specific response, and got the response 48 hours later that they'd been in contact and sorted out an appointment. So they are very responsive if they are contacted with details. So I would encourage GPs to use that system if particular patients are having a problem.
Stuart?
I know we've commented in the last year or two on the improvement quality of papers that we get in all these committees. And I think, you know, it's enabled us to make a decision recently that rather than meet every month on quality, performance and finance, we're going to meet bi-monthly. And I think that's in recognition of the work that's been done in the last year or so, the improvement. So the board gets that assurance, but it's not necessary now to meet every month. And it lightens the workload for the executive team or the teams working with the executive. And I think we need to recognise the investment and effort that's been made by people within the team to get us to that point.
Yeah, and on that point, Paul and I did some training on Monday for the staff on how to constantly improve what they do and provide information as part of the work. The next phase of the journey around all the providers, which we had I think about 30 people in the room. It was a good discussion. People found it Paul's Baker's dozen response, which have top tips of how to seek assurance from lay members and get the most out of committees ultimately. The other thing is, just so we know what clear on the call waiting times, actually, I don't think we often measure this, but people should be clear. The call waiting times are actually measured in seconds. The average handling time should not exceed call handling times 220 seconds. Actually, we're now at 150 seconds. So in reality, waiting times on the phone are not, and there are average obviously, and they will vary, but broadly that's the trend.
Okay. Yeah, Alison?
Just one final point on the quality of these papers. It does mean that in some committees we have had to say to people presenting papers that they shouldn't take offence if they don't get loads and loads and loads of questions. Simply because it's very often the case now that those potential questions are answered further down in the paper or further down in the paper or in the graphs or whatever. So it's just important to note that that silence on a paper or just minimal challenge on a paper does not mean that nobody's interested, and it's something we regularly put over.
Okay. Any final questions before we move on? No. So I think Diane, clearly a demonstration of assurance both in terms of the quality and performance committees and also what's been presented here. Absolutely noted, and I think that the clarity of the report, as I think others have said, is really, really helpful for us to ensure that we are absolutely on top of the performance of our providers. So, sorry, I've got my microphone off and I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, so thank you very much for that. And now we're going to move over to Elke for the finance report. Thank you. This is for discussion.
Thank you, Nicholas. Yes, I'm presenting to committee the month 6 finance report. So this is to the period to end of September. And as Rod had already mentioned earlier, we are reporting a surplus year to date, which is due to allocations that have been received that have not yet got a spending plan against them. For outturn, we continue to report break even. And really that position has remained unchanged for the last 3 or 4 months because our plan, we are delivering to plan. We have a very well set out financial plan, and the activity we're seeing come through is in line with those plans. We have reached agreements with a couple of our main providers around a year-end position. Both sides are agreeable to, which has in effect removed what might otherwise possibly present as risks later in the year. So the only area where we see a variance from plan is in prescribing, and that is really due to the increase in short supply drugs, the cost of short supply drugs. That has leveled off, so at the moment we haven't seen that get any worse, and we're also able to, to assure the board that we can meet that from reserves, from non-recurrent reserves. So we can assure the board that there was no risk to the outturn position of break-even, and consequently we are proposing a reduction in the risk of achieving financial balance. I won't sort of go into any more detail on that, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you. Questions or points?
Very clear report.
Yeah,
Ravi,
yeah.
It's amazing to see these reports now, to see actually balance, and also to see that when we hit some Sorry, let me press the far right button. It's lovely to see these reports, but also to see that when we do hit some bumpy rocks on the way, we are in a position to mitigate them and to mitigate them effectively and still be at outturn figures that are in balance. Thank you.
Any other points? Okay, thank you very much, Elke. Points noted, and of course, all of this goes into considerable detail in the finance committee, so that is there. Okay, so I'm going to move straight on now to communications and engagement report, which I know Juliet has written. I don't know, are you going to just say a little bit? This is obviously for assurance.
So Juliet's away now, so I think it's just really to give you a broad update as we normally do around the work we've been doing. She's referred to the significant with patients, patient groups and representatives. There's a lot of work going on around winter at the moment, as we would expect. And similarly, we took a strategic decision not to go out and do massive communications around CRCH, because actually it's just about the shift in mobilisation, but she's starting to work on that now, or the team, I should say. I did want to make reference to the fact that we've now included patient reps in the primary care contracting panel, which I actually sat on because Lynn was away. So that's also a development. You talk about development of lay members. Actually, we've done some training for patient reps because it's also quite difficult. These things. So actually, that was the first time they attended, and I think we're going to gather them all together, Lynn, aren't we, to do a session? Then at Primary Care Committee, which is also in this report here, we actually signed off a kite mark programme around PPGs, which is very exciting. And so bronze, silver and gold. Heather, I think, is that right?
Yeah,
Heather's been working on this significant thing. And loads of engagement, and we're quite keen to see that taken up by practices in the forthcoming months as that's launched. So other than that, I think the rest is clear.
Thank you. Yeah, Alison.
Just quickly on that point about involving patients in things like primary care network. We have found that the more things we involve them in, the more challenging some of the roles that they're expected to play are. So one thing we are doing on the 28th of January, I believe, is bringing patients together who don't normally come together at any of our other networks, but who are involved in specific work streams to share their experiences and the difficulties and the challenges that they face. Because we know the harder we push with this, the better we're doing, but the more challenging it becomes. And we don't want to put some of our providers off patient involvement simply because the patients are, having difficulty understanding their role. So we know we're doing the right thing, but we also know we've got to give those patients more support and guidance, and that's what we're planning to do on the 28th of January.
Okay, can I just ask, Alison, is that going to be a daytime event?
Yes.
So is there any consideration to those patient group representatives that are working age in terms of maybe something that could be a follow-up?
We might follow up, but because these are very specific people who are already involved, then we know that they're available to come to that. But yes, if we were recruiting, we do run evening events as well. And we're more and more trying to build in evening events to attract a more working age demographic.
Yeah, Velma.
Is this open to other lay members to attend?
You're always invited, then.
Yeah. Absolutely. The reason why I asked is that you know, I may, it's first of all interesting to hear what you're saying, but also I may have one or two suggestions to offer, because the completely different was in the Grenfell, government have set up a commission in terms of the memorial, and the reps there have been self-selected, but then they put themselves forward, but various community groups voted for them. And what government is having to do, and I'm involved in that, is training is probably not the right word, but to give them some kind of guidance and support about roles. Because when you're a patient or when you're somebody who suffered, you know, your whole family is dead, it's very difficult to be in a group where you're not simply thinking about yourself. It's the wider community in the patient.
Absolutely.
And in that case, it's the wider Grenfell community they're representing in terms of what is the best memorial, as opposed to them individually. So I can see some similarities, that's why I asked.
Absolutely, Thelma, and it is the case that we do need to move some of our patients involved away from pursuing their very, very personal issues within, you know, without recognition of the fact that there are other things going on. Because we've discussed this before, I have made sure with Heather that you're always on the invitation list for those events, and you'd be very welcome to pass on that advice. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other points? No? Okay, thank you very much. So I think that, so many thanks to Juliet for that. Audit committee report, which Paul, I don't think I want to just introduce for assurance.
Yes, I would like to. I know that it will have been read and reread many times over.
Very short, to me.
Yeah. But I will just go through a few of the points in it, I think, not least because it's good to just reinforce some of the work that the committee does. In terms of the first paragraph talks about the decision register, and we go through every single meeting the decision register and the conflicts of interest and how they've been managed to make sure that we have a proper audit trail that demonstrates that we're properly managing conflicts of interest. And I think that's something that we were actually ahead of the curve on, I think, in putting in place, but it's really well maintained, and the committee gets pretty good assurance by that all the way. One of the topics that did come out of it, and also related to one of the internal audits that had happened, was that just to remind people of the message that you know, declaring interests was not just a one-off event. It's like a puppy; it's forever. So you have to keep it front and centre, and as new interests come on and you take on new business, which happens to lots of colleagues around the table and elsewhere in the organisation, we need to make sure that people are proactive in declaring them and not wait to be sort of spotted on LinkedIn or whatever and asked about it. So I think that's a really important message for everybody to take back. Gifts and hospitality, again, we also keep a look on that. We don't just look at the individual gifts and hospitality offered and declined, but also look for patterns across sort of major suppliers or anything like that to see if there's any considerable sort of queuing up of offers. There are no particular issues in that. And certainly from the lay member side, we don't get any gifts or hospitality at all, which is pretty abrupt, actually.
You made everybody surprised.
My elder daughter did make mince pies for the training session. That's true. That's only because the chilies had already been swept though. So, information governance, the NHS has changed its toolkit, which again to increase the level of security around that. We have some plans in place to deal with that. Biggest thing that we need to do is to sort of test how well the system works with an incident. That would be jolly entertaining. If it hasn't happened already, it will be entertaining when it does, I'm sure. Annual self-effectiveness review, one of the only points that came out of it was the formal reporting to the board, which is why I'm going into a little bit more detail today for you, not just because it's really interesting. We went through the financial policies, very interesting again. We did had a useful discussion about how fit for purpose they were as with the evolving sort of role of the CCG within the wider health system. And very helpfully outside of the meeting, Elka went away and checked it out and came back and confirmed to us that actually, yep, we were in good state with that. We look at whistleblowing 6 monthly. We don't get a lot of that in the CCG. It seems that the process is well understood. it seems that the staff survey that people understand the process. It's always slightly concerning that the dog isn't barking, but it's probably, but I think with sort of taking into account other soft intelligence, we're reasonably assured that actually the reason there's no whistleblowing is because things are actually going okay. Internal audit, I said here we had two audits since the last meeting, and I imagine that the next substantial will be a treat for the next audit committee, so that's something to look forward to. The substantial assurance on medicines management, very good result, and as Catherine said earlier, nice to see a splash of green on the thing. I think the internal auditors have got a new pen or something. Reasonable assurance on conflicts of interest, and the only area where the auditors had some issues there, the biggest issue was within joint meetings with council and with the STP. So that a lot of meetings where people simply weren't asking for interest to be declared. So I think that's something that CCG representatives need to be aware of to try to sort of push the message as we go out there. Last thing I wanted to mention was that there had been earlier in the year a moderate assurance report on STP work streams. We went through the action plan and what was going on. Progress was underway, things were going on as management had said they would, and there will be a follow-up audit on that later in the year. So quite a nice peaceful meeting, which is what we like in audit committee, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul, for that extensive summary. Okay, questions? Elma, sorry.
Is there any member of staff required to complete the conflict of interest training that we do as well?
Yes.
Okay.
We did change it recently just to say that we originally trained everyone who was a decision maker.
Yeah.
And now we decided to give blanket coverage to absolutely everyone.
Any other points? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Paul. That's very helpful. Finally, move on to item 12, which is the health and safety strategy and policy for approval, which is a rather extensive tome, is it not? I think Manda's been very much behind the Elke you're introducing. Thank you.
Yes, that's right. And I'm pleased to say, although it's an extensive tome, it's only had a relatively minor change, which is really around the devolving responsibility for health and safety to managers. And along with that comes a checklist self-assessment as well as an organisational self-assessment. So what that really does is it puts the responsibility to the teams, to the line managers at every level to make sure health and safety is observed and complied with. The checklists at the back of the document, they then allow line managers and us as an organisation to give the board assurance. So as we go through those, we can assure that we have indeed complied with the requirements of the policy and we comply with health and safety requirements. So it's large, but the change is relatively minor. So I will leave it at that, but I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Any questions?
I think we're doing a lot training up with everyone, so managers understand their responsibilities.
Yeah.
That's the next key thing we have to sort out with this. So that's actually why we came up with the checklist, so it forces people to think and make sure they respond.
Sorry, Thelma, go on.
Two things linked. What's the impact on managers taking on this responsibility in terms of resources? Because we hear about the lot of work people have to do. And secondly, if that responsibility is now being transferred to individuals, what happens to the staff who used to do it? Presumably it was done centrally. And how is it monitored? Because I suppose when you have a small team responsible for that responsibility, there's reports, there's monitoring, there's records of it. Now, if you've got 20 managers and 20 managers are doing that, how is it monitored to make sure it's done? So it's all linked.
Yeah. And it's a very fair question. And in this context, what we are asking line managers to do is really part and parcel of being good line managers. It isn't actually very onerous, but what it means is that line managers are aware, they are conscious, they are managing that as part of managing their teams. So this will filter through ordinary team meetings. Senior leadership team is a level in the organisation who will undoubtedly will look for first line assurance, training records. So it isn't, I would not consider it to be onerous in a way that I would expect any staff member to say, I won't be able to do this. It's actually good practice, best practice, and it's probably common across many organisations that this sits at line manager level, because you cannot have one or two people in corporate keeping an eye on this and making sure it's all okay. So I don't think there's a resource issue, because it's just part and parcel of being a line manager, team manager.
But we're not getting rid of the corporate team who are overseeing everything that's going on. And so it's adding to what we've already got.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, Paul.
I think we're due for a workforce update meeting at the January board. I think it would be useful to make sure that it includes some health and safety stats, because I don't know if it's planned to or not, but if not, but I think that we should probably see that here at the board.
We can do, but we need to roll. We're just in the process of rolling out all this training, so I think we should bring in as part. We bring the stats then as part of that once we've done the work.
I mean, I think the board needs to be on. The board is responsible, so it needs to be on top of reporting of incidents and training and all that. So, yeah.
So just a quick question, or I don't know if you can answer it, but just in terms of obviously the move into the forum and whether that's actually, you know, the fact that we are actually in a building which has got a multiple number of users, whether that's had any impact.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah,
So we
I've
answered that. So do you want me to do that? Yes. So we did. So we did do it. Was
Too emotional, Rob.
and actually, you shouldn't be speaking to it. Otherwise, it gets worse, doesn't it? But is that so? Yeah, we did do a whole end-to-end health and safety review and external people. And actually, what that has shown, this is one of the changes that's come out of it. Plus, also, the policies were very different from building to building, and actually, people made different decisions around chairs. And actually, we still have an issue that we're waiting for around lockers, funnily enough, and that's all to do with health and safety. Fire, you'd be surprised what I do. Fire retardant wood. So in reality, it does feel like it's very accountable at the top in relation to health and safety. We did, and actually, so for one example, we moved a number of desks 3 centimetres to cope with wires, and so there was loads of things that we did as part of the move. And actually, we're still very conscious about it, I think, because we're all in a much smaller space. That's another reason why I think it has to also become everybody's responsibility. So, you know, there's been quite an extensive review, and I'm working collectively with the council.
Good. Okay.
Just giving a slightly less formal response. I think it actually feels like that on the ground, you know, when you're working in a building, that there is a collective responsibility in that.
Yeah.
It's not just us in the building, it's the council, and therefore, you know, we are adhering to health and safety. And I think it's been based in consciousness, because, you know, as part of the review.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Any other points? Okay, so that was for approval. Yeah, I have nods all round. Yeah, thank you very much. So the following items are just the committee meetings, which will be included for information, and I'm going to suggest that unless there are any points in any of those, that we note those, and then move on to the final part of our meeting, which is just reviewing our conflicts of interest. Was there anything that we
don't have any other than the normal GP declaration that they're provided?
No. Okay, that's fine, Rob. Thank you very much. Reflections on equality and diversity in relation to our decisions. Clearly inherent and very much integral into all our decision making. I don't think there's anything new.
So there was one on the health and safety strategy policy, which did need further escalation.
Right.
So
we need to make a note of that.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, has that been noted? Yeah, great. Okay. Risks identified during the meeting.
New risks.
New risks.
I mean, I think we just talked about the need to look at the wider health economy in terms of, so not new risks per se, but to think more broadly about what we might
and how we
look at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. So it just means to confirm that the next meeting is on Thursday, the 30th of January. Do we know the venue yet?
If we do, I forget.
No, don't worry. Don't worry. Okay. Okay.
It's not here.
Okay, unless there's any other urgent other business, I'm actually going to now close the meeting. We do, as a board, now need to meet in private. Oh, sorry. So was there something going on? Yes. Ah, thank you very much. Is your voice going as well? Okay. Everybody's getting very quiet. Okay, so we now need to move into a private meeting. So I would ask the member of the public. Thank you very much for your attendance, and we're now going to meet in private. Thank you.
Thank you.